Herkese merhabalar.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We are here today to declare the results of a research project sponsored by Anti-Migrant, Turkey. Evren Barta, Ezgi, Elçi, and Deniz, Sert are the authors of the project. Unfortunately, Professor Deniz and Ezgi, Evren, excuse me, cannot be with us today because of health care problems. But Ezgi Elçi is going to talk to us about the results. Before we start our presentation, I'd like to invite Mr. David Brakel, the chairman of the Turkey office of Anti-Migrant, to deliver the inauguration remarks. I would like to excuse myself, David Bartel.
Okay, for the translation. Okay, I will start again. Merhaba, iyi günler. Adım David.
My name is David Bartelt. I'm the head of the Anti-Migrant in Turkey. I speak only a little Turkish. For this reason, now I'll switch to English.
Easier for me. Welcome on behalf of the Heinrich Böll Foundation to this event. I'm looking forward very much to this debate for several reasons, actually. One of which is I'm really personally very much concerned about migration, the future of migration, and the politicization of migration, which is one of the key categories of your findings, I understand. And also because we have we have a very different situation on the one hand, but we have some comparable conditions in Turkey and Germany, one of which being the size of the native population and also the size of the number of refugees. Both of them are more or less comparable. You have 84 million citizens, we have 82, 83, and both of us, we have something below 4 million refugees and migrants in the country. Of course, the composition, the ethnic composition is very different, and the overall political and economic conditions to handle this situation is also difficult, but it could be interesting to compare. And for me, there are two categories very important, one of which I already mentioned. The other one is one of the key elements of nation building and nationalism, which is in English called the othering, right? To find the other, a group of people you can declare, if not an enemy, then at least the opposite of what the nation is supposed to be and under which conditions the nation is supposed to be composed. In the Turkish tradition, you have a very strong tradition of looking at the other internally. And now the migrants only recently have come up to be an external other for Turkish nation, Turkish nationalism. Whereas in Germany, we have more the tendency to look at the others from the outside, even though they can be inside the country, as is the case of the migrants. And politicization is really the second very, very important category. We have, you mentioned in the study, Zafer Partisi, a new party built upon the issue. And we have in Germany a rather new party which is not exclusively founded upon anti-migration policies, but it is a very strong angle of them. Unfortunately, unlike Zafer Partisi, this party, it's called AfD, which is in German Alternative for Germany, is a very successful one. They have more than 20% of the votes and are entering one regional parliament after the other, are in the national parliament and are playing a very, very important role. So, for instance, I'm curious to hear, what do you think made Zafer? You said they had 2.3%. You think it's a success? I would say, comparing with Germany, it's fortunately a very small number comparing to 20%, right? So what happened when migration, anti-migration saliency tendency was so strong in early 2023, but then has declined, as I understand of this study. Okay, I will leave it at that. You can see I'm very curious, and I think migration is, for the future of our societies, a key issue. And still very few people understand that migration is just something that is normal to global development, has always happened, will always happen. We as Germans, probably within Europe, we are the ethnic group that most has migrated over the last 200, 250 years. People tend to forget that. So looking forward to this discussion. Thank you very much for being here and for your valuable papers that you have produced, and let's have a good discussion. Thank you.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz David Bey.
Well, thank you very much, David, for this opening remarks. Before we start the presentation, I would like to introduce ourselves, because as far as I know, there is live broadcast as well. My name is Deniz. I'm a lecturer at Galatasaray University, Department of Sociology. I've been working in the area of migration for many years, and I'm also one of the founders of the Migration Studies Association. Together with Deniz, we have been with the foundation, starting with the earlier days actually. I told you that there were 3 authors to this paper. Mr. Elçi is one of them. He is a professor at Özyeğin University, Department of International Relations and Political Sciences. He's going to present the paper, but I'd like to say a few words about the context in which we are going to debate this paper. Today is the first day of the second centennial of our republic. I'm sure most of you joined the celebrations of the 100th anniversary of the republic. I'm sure you've joined some seminars or celebrations. The first century of Turkey was shaped with migration, different waves of migration actually. Starting with the last days of the Ottoman Empire, we started receiving a lot of immigrants from different parts of the world. Sometimes we called them muhajir, sometimes we called them muhabir, sometimes we called them immigrants or irregular immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers. About 10 years ago, after 2011, Syrians started to come to Turkey, and we call them our guests or people under temporary protection. But each time there was a migration wave, the immigrants who came to the country were the focus of attention and focus of political debate. And David also mentioned this. Nationalism or our national identity. I'm using these words in quotations actually because there are political debates behind these concepts actually. In fact, migration and migrants are also important components of what makes us a nation. Yes, historically we've received a lot of migration waves, but the breaking point was with the Syrians that came to Turkey after 2010, because it was a big crowd actually. About 3.5 to 4 million Syrians are in Turkey now with different status, and they account for 4.5 to 5% of our country's population, which is quite big actually. And in their report, we've seen several times that demography is one of the most important of the debate behind this migration. And in fact, the wave of Syrians or Syrian immigrants came to Turkey in the last 10 years, and they also collided with a very fluctuating or conflicting times in our history as well. Therefore, they've become the topic of discussion and debate on social media, in the media, traditional media, and also in academic papers as well. So the research that we're going to listen to today is again a very important one, and Mr. Elçi is going to share the results with us. Before giving him the floor, I also would like to say a few words about misinformation or conflicting ideas. Because of lack of information, this topic was debated in social media, not very sound foundation actually. That's why I think the research that we're going to hear today is a big contribution to extend our knowledge about the facts and to have a more insightful debate about migration. Again, I would like to thank the authors and Heidelberg-Stiftung for their contribution. So, Mr. Elçi, the floor is yours. Well, thank you very much for coming here today. In fact, the study that we're going to talk about today is a final study or a final report of two different studies. And this is the first day of the second century of our republic, and it is very good to be here actually. And hopefully from now on we will have better days to come, more enlightened days. And hopefully we will get back together in better days as well. As Didem said, we wrote this report together with Evren Balta and Deniz Sert. Our first report was published before the elections, a couple of months before the elections, and we had the chance to present this report in a meeting in Ankara. But that report, that first report, looked at data up until 2021. And we did not have data for 2022 and 23. For this reason, Zafer Party, the Victory Party, which was founded in August 2021, we were not able to see their effect. And when we received positive reaction about our first report, we also received the motivation and support of Heidelberg-Stiftung to conduct a second study about this topic, and here we are with the results, and we are very grateful for their support. Okay, elections of 2023. Refugees or migration was one of the most debated topic before the elections actually, and I'm sure that this debate will come back in the future as well. Especially it was intensely debated by the opposition, the Nations Alliance, and they spoke about migration with negative background actually, or with negative connotations. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, you can see him in one of the posters, and he highlights the fact that Syrians will go back and decide now. This is not independent from the general atmosphere in Turkey. With the transition to the presidential system in Turkey, we had more polarization, and we went through some changes which led to further polarization in the country. And because of its nature, the system brought together different political parties and different political groups under the same umbrella. Zafer Partisi, Victory Party, was one of the leading ones actually, but when you look at their votes, small parties came to the position of kingmakers. I mean, although they had very low rates of votes, thanks to being part of the alliances, they had the chance to be in politics and affect the general political debate in the country. Throughout the elections, we saw that nationalism was on the rise, and there were lots of criticism targeted to the Nations Alliance by the ruling party's alliance, which is the People's Alliance actually. And again, there was a lot of debate going around migration, and the Ancestral Alliance, which also hosted Zafer Party, received a lot of votes actually, which cannot be underestimated. I think that was one of the most important results of the elections. Before the first round, anti-migration was not a very hot topic of the political debate actually. In the first round, Erdogan received 49% of the vote, and his second rival, Kılıçdaroğlu, received around 45% of the votes. And the elections were not finalized in the first round, so there had to be a second round. And before the second round, we started seeing a rise in the debate around migration actually. Sinan Ogan, the candidate of the Ancestral Alliance, came third with 5% of the votes in the first round. And on the other hand, the most well-known or the strongest party within the Ancestral Alliance was Zafer, the Victory Party, under the leadership of Ümit Özdağ. And although they were established in August 2021, they managed to receive 2.5% of the votes. And I think this is quite a big success despite their young age. And as we went towards the second round, Sinan Ogan said he would support the then President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Ümit Özdağ and the Victory Party provided their support to Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Of course, a protocol was signed between Kılıçdaroğlu and Ümit Özdağ, and the biggest fear was that the immigrants were going to be sent back. But on the other hand, in the second round, the cake was smaller, therefore the Nations Alliance adopted a more nationalistic discourse, and they started showing further opposition against the immigrants. A couple of days before the elections, Recep Tayyip Erdogan made a public speech which was broadcast in 18 channels around the country, and in this speech he said the immigrants are not going to be sent back because he believed that this is just cruel, and this is against the pillars of Islam, this is against the pillars of being a human being, he said. And when we look at the results of the second round, Erdogan became the president once again with 52% of the vote. Well, I'd like to provide you a theoretical background actually. We were talking about this before the presentation began, and David also mentioned this in his speech. In fact, when we look at the global trends, we see a similar pattern around the world. On the top right-hand side picture, you see some posters from Brexit. So UK is leaving the European Union. And this was a poster used before the referendum. And again, this refers to anti-migration or anti-immigrant policies of the ruling party in the UK. And in Germany, there's AfD, for instance, they have 20% of the vote. In the Netherlands, Party for Freedom, they've been in the parliament for many years now, and they affect the government's policies. In France, there's Front National. Again, somehow in the last 2 presidential elections, Marine Le Pen manages to make it to the second round. In Italy, there are some parties, for instance, the Melonian Party, with clear anti-immigrant policies. They're now at the top of the government as well. Looking at Eastern Europe, Hungary, for instance, is one of the biggest advocates for anti-immigration. So in many countries, immigrants and migration are a hot topic of the agenda. Of course, in academia, we try to find an answer to the following question. These political parties, mainstream parties or parties in the center of the political wings, how do they shape their policies around migration? Some researchers say that anti-immigrant debate is contagious. So when a political party starts to talk about immigration or anti-migration policies, other political parties follow suit. But according to some researchers, this is just a topic which is discussed before elections, and it's not that contagious. But since 2011, for instance, in Turkey, we received a lot of Syrian refugees. And when we look at the previous studies, there are some by me, some by Professor Deniz, we saw that up until 2019, the issue of refugees in Turkey was not a very influential topic, actually, around elections or around the politics. In fact, economy is one of the most important shapers of the elections, actually. But we can also give some other examples, and we can compare ourselves with the rest of the European countries. And this doesn't sound very natural, or this doesn't sound very normal. And for instance, the AKP's, Justice and Development Party's religious debate somehow balances the migration debate, because most of the immigrants are from Arab countries, Muslim countries, and AKP doesn't want to be so much against them. Also, the situation is controlled by the media agencies, which are close to the government or ruling party, and that's why we do not see migration as a big crisis, because the media controls the pulse of the people. And also being religious and religious debate is the main reason why we have not seen migration as a big crisis in Turkey. So we have to come to the establishment of Zafer Party now. And we have to see how this affected the position of the mainstream parties. So in this research, we try to see their effect, actually.
I have not mentioned this example, but we also investigated Sweden in this regard, because in Sweden we see an anti-immigration movement, the Swedish Democrats, the far right. In migration in Sweden, it has become political as well. How so? First, there's a need for the migration issue to be politicized by a specific party. This is the first step. So one party starts to talk about migration all the time, and they're trying to mobilize the electorate around anti-migration. And then in due time, because the number of migrants is going up, or a party mentioning it in their discourse very often, it becomes more visible. Interestingly, in Sweden, this situation has resulted in more positive attitude toward. This happened as the migration issue was regarded in the positive light in Sweden, actually. Electorate, then they start to depart from this middle, from the center of pro-migration. Swedish Democrats, they won seats in the parliament, and with it, it becomes more visible because there's a party representing the anti-migration sentiment, and the media organizations and outlets, they're trying to, they started to report on it more, and mainstream parties, they began to radicalize their stance on migration. And the role of the media is prominent in this process, which is referred to by many academicians in many studies. There is one point which is important: anti-migration parties or anti-refugee parties, when they're established, they have a low voting rate or vote rate at first, and they have less financial resources. And as they become more visible in the media outlets in time, because what they are talking about is unfortunately something which draws attention and increases the number of viewers. So even if there's a negative connotation, even if the parties are criticized publicly, they ensure that it is kept on the agenda, the anti-migration sentiment, and their legitimacy increases, their prestige increases, their recognizability goes up, and this is how it developed. The situation developed in Sweden, and this is the rise of the Swedish Democrats in Sweden, and parties in the central left, central right, they were not that prominent in the media anymore, but the Swedish Democrats. So this is some background information. This is the data and methodology of our study. So the data comes from the party group speeches of the top 5 parties represented in the Turkish Grand National Assembly. First, we have had 900 speeches, then in the second study 189 speeches. They cover 2011 to the election period, all the party group speeches in the parliament, and 1089. Well, you see AKP, CHP, HDP, MHP, and E-Party. So the top 5 parties with the highest votes, their party group speeches were collated. Why? Because we wanted to analyze comparable speeches. Because election speeches and parliamentary group speeches, they're different from one another. They have a different context. That's why we needed to come up with a systematic, because they were delivered every week, and analyzing these speeches was somehow of an advantage for us. I have to also add that as the president was elected, he could not join the group meetings because he had to be impartial, unbiased, but he had meetings with the muhtars. And to make up for this gap, we used his speeches to the muhtars because the content and the context was the same, but it doesn't cover all speeches. So parliamentary group meetings were taken as a basis. We analyzed their speeches. Methodology, holistic grading. We use a holistic grading in our study, like when you read notes. There's a guideline when you read exams. It's kind of a guideline for us to read the speeches. And the coding system was trained to, investigate it in a certain way. So we wanted, the system is grading the speech between 0 and 1, actually. 0 is, it's pro-migration, pro-refugees, so, the opposite, more anti-migration. And to what extent was it discussed? And did they talk about Syrian migrants or not? So this was all investigated. This is used to measure populism and nationalism, in fact, but they have different guidelines. I mean, populism, nationalism, they have kind of different scoring systems, but we wanted to contribute to literature with this system, which measures anti-migration sentiment. Hopefully, the scale that we developed will be utilized in other publications. And then we have investigated how Syrian migration has been framed by parties, and it has been framed in under five headings: culturally, economically, security, political, framing. So this is the we have grouped the way they frame this in 5 headings. You can find detailed information about data and methodology in our report. If you have any question, please feel free to ask at any time. Now, I'd like to talk about the tone in these speeches. So, 1,089 speeches were analyzed. 256 of them are talking about Syrian refugees. So even if there's one statement on Syrians, we've taken that into consideration. And we said that they talk about Syrian refugees, which is 24% of the agenda. So 1/4 of the agenda is made up of Syrian rhetoric, Syrian migrant rhetoric. This is the first graph covering 2011, 2021. And the tone and the markedness, the blue is the tone, and the red one is the number of speeches. And you see the salience and the tone. So, and then you see the middle line, the average. So when you look at the average of all speeches between 2011 and 2021, the political party leaders, they have been below the central curve or point, middle point. So anti-migration discourse have been balanced out with positive stance or discourse on migration. So they have all been, were balanced in a way. Until 2019 elections, the migration issue or refugee issue did not change the voting behavior or had a weak effect on the voting behavior because of this balanced discourse when it comes to migration. What about the establishment of victory party, Zafer Party? Look at the blue line. It goes above the central curve or the central point. So in 2021, as Zafer Party was established, the general tone has become more negative since then. I would like to repeat that this is the average of top 5 parties. So this is the average of top 5 parties. They're in more positive stances toward migration, more negative stances. They have been all collated in. Some people expected it to be higher, but still we can see that until that point in time it was quite balanced. But with the establishment of Zafer Party, the tone has changed to the negative. What about changes in parties? The tone is vertical, the horizontal is salience. And the red one is before the Zafer Party, tone and salience. The blue ones are after the establishment of Zafer Party, the tone and salience after the establishment of the party. So this is blue. You can divide parties in 2 groups or categorize them in 2 groups based on this graph. One is similar to Zafer Party. They refer to Turkish nationalism, central left or central right parties. So CHP, E-Party and Nationalist Movement Party, MHP, are in this group. And to remind you of the fact that Zafer Party and E-Party, they come from MHP. They came out of a spin-off of MHP, so they have the same or similar electorate with MHP. Let's have a look at the results. CHP. Well, there's lower saliency, but we have a more anti-migrant tone there with Zafer Parti's establishment. So it's a negative discourse when it comes to migrants. Let's look at MHP. Both the salience and the tone has changed. Here we see a more positive stance toward migration and migrants and refugees. But you can find this graph in the report up until 2017, until they joined People's Alliance. They were the anti-migrant party in Turkey. And then with the alliance politics and because they joined the Justice and Development Party in the alliance, they changed their tone into a more positive one toward migrants and refugees. Let's talk about E-Party. In terms of saliency and tone, well, there has been a marked change there compared with other analysis. So the tone has increased markedly, so they are completely anti-migrant, anti-refugee in their discourse when we analyze Mrs. Akşener's speeches after the establishment of Zafer Party. What about the parties that are not the same as Zafer Party in terms of their political stance? Justice and Development, AKP, they are more pro-migrants. They have a more positive stance toward refugees and migrants. But since the establishment of Zafer Party in the parliamentary group meetings, they preferred not to talk about this topic at all. Maybe this is a strategic choice of theirs or some kind of another way of going about the politics of it, but this is only parliamentary group meetings, as I said. I mean, the election speeches and some inauguration speeches delivered by Erdogan, which were kept out of the scope of our study. Only in the parliamentary group meetings, they do not prefer to talk about migrants and refugees. This is an important indicator, as I said, because they are conducted on a weekly basis. Politicians, they interact with one another during those meetings and respond to each other's questions and motions. So the People's Democratic Party, HDP, due to, well, maybe reacting, because of its reaction against the establishment of the Zafer Party, they have become more pro-migrant and pro-refugee. So, how did the frameworks change? I mean, how did the parties frame this matter? When I talked about cultural, economic, political, security frames used. But to what extent did they change since the establishment of the party? The first outcome in the report says that anti-refugee or anti-migrant sentiments has been framed economically. We talk about welfare chauvinism, the social benefits provided by the government being exploited by refugees, migrants. This is at the center of political chauvinism, welfare chauvinism. So this is the highest frame. We have had in the first report welfare chauvinism number one change, and this is again prominent in the second study. So in 35% of the speeches we analyzed, we've seen this is 35% of all the speeches that were analyzed. We've seen that welfare chauvinism came to the fore. Why didn't they want refugees? Because of the welfare. Well, then keeping, refugees away from European Union. People said the EU bribes Turkey to keep refugees away from its territory and prevents border crossings. They talked about that. So then refugees change Turkish demographic structure. That is one statement. Or refugees, they are involved in terrorist activities, was another statement in the security frame. And of course, border security plays a prominent role. The Nation Alliance said borders are an honor, and this we have seen in the social media or in conventional media outlets. So refugees crossing the border has become more visible. So, and this developed in line with people crossing, refugees crossing the border. So let's talk about the contribution of the study, and talked about the strengths and weaknesses of the study. We are using the election manifestos in political sciences, in our political science analysis, but the manifestos, even if they're coded systematically by manifesto project, the issue of migration has just started to be coded, and that's why we used proxy variables, multiculturalism, national style of living or living standard. This is what people utilized, but election manifestos, on the other hand, they're focusing on election periods mostly. Every 4th year, every 5th year, there is an election, and people analyze the election, and the period in between the two elections remains invisible. And in our study, we investigated the period in between two elections. And another problem with manifestos is that non-cultural issues dominate this, like infrastructure, education, healthcare. They are the ones that dominate the agenda. And that's why migrants and refugees, they are less part of the agenda there. We had elite interviews. We talked with political party representatives. This was also the case in the first report. But in those talks with political party representatives, we asked several questions, and it becomes difficult to analyze everything in due time, but this is the weakness. We have less representation of some parties. The data set is composed of speeches delivered during the parliamentary group meetings, and the coding method, as it is tested in other countries and other cases, hopefully it will be reproducible and utilized by others as well. And on the map you see what different countries, anti-migration, far-right parties that I mentioned and David mentioned in his speech. There are left populist parties among those as well, but most of the time they're anti-migration right-wing parties. Last but not least, I don't know how much time I have left, but yes, I'll talk about policy recommendations. It was in the first report as well, but we need to repeat. Data transparency is important. So we have seen that in our hands, at hand, the Migration Directorate has a limited data set. The Ministry of the Interior has limited data set to share with us. And I investigated Turkish migrants in Germany, and I saw a website, I forgot the name of it, but it was about Turkish migrants, and I have had easy access to data sets there. So there is data transparency in Turkey, but in Germany, excuse me, but it's not possible to say that for Turkey. And the more non-transparent you are, the more you're saving the day as the Turkish government, the more anti-migration sentiments will grow. So for different migration types, different policies need to be developed. Syrian refugees, they are here under temporary protection, but we have people under international protection as well in Turkey that are refugees. There are different international conventions that apply and to them, but they are all the same kind of basket, and this is why we forget that you have to detail it. There are people who want to go back, Syrian migrants, if any, I mean, we have seen in our questionnaires before that we have very low number of people who would like to go back. Well, we need a better relationship with the Syrian government in this matter, and different integration mechanisms are required for different migration types. This is the topic of another presentation, in fact. This is a recommendation for Turkish political parties, especially opposition parties. They have to be more data-centric and more data-based in their analysis. We call on them to be like this. Well, migration is not only about Syrians. There are different migration types and migrant and refugee categories in Turkey which need to be addressed. The EU-Turkey deal is criticized a lot, also during the election period. And they said they would cancel the European Union-Turkey deal. I mean, the opposition party, they should look for ways to renegotiate, in fact, this issue. This would be best for all stakeholders. In fact, the return or repatriation discourse, is it realistic or not? I mean, it's debatable. Parties should, well, when they talk to the electorate, they should say how complicated and complex this matter is. Integration for refugees that would like to stay in Turkey. This is another important matter. A sound integration system has to be put into place. Migration is something which goes beyond parties. It's a supra-party kind of issue and should be regarded as such. Mainstream parties, they should come up with their own political agendas instead of adopting the stance of others. And this is suggestion for European Union and member states. The Turkey-EU deal needs to be renegotiated. This is the first recommendation. Irregular migration and international protection, they're different policy areas. They have to be dealt in a separate way. The externalization politics of the European Union should be reviewed. There's many academic literature on that. And we hope that it will help, this literature will help the European Union as well. Backstage politics, it does not work. In fact, you have to talk to different actors in Turkey. They should become part of this open dialogue, public dialogue. And all public opinion should be informed about the real situation the refugees find themselves in. We need to strengthen ties between Turkey and European Union, and to this end, the civil society should be invited to help, to assist not only civil society but local governments, municipalities. They should be part of this process, not only central governments. Local governments need to be transferred funds to help with this issue. Thank you very much. That's all.
Herkese
Well, thank you very much, Ezgi, for this valuable presentation. I'd like to make a couple of reminders before we go into the Q&A session. We have an audience from YouTube, and our audience in the YouTube channel can ask their questions via the YouTube chat session. And secondly, if you haven't registered to this meeting, please sign the participants list as you're leaving. And the report is available in English and Turkish. You can take a copy for yourself. And also we have some beverages and some snacks. Before we leave, you can benefit from them as well. So these were my reminders. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, so without further ado, let's go to the Q&A session. Is it okay now? Because I have to keep an eye on the YouTube channel as well. Okay. But okay, let's start with you. Can you introduce yourself? My name is Yıldız Önal. I'm a member of the Refugee Rights Platform. What you said at the beginning was very important. Our platform was established in 2020, and the idea was to find a way to prevent further anti-refugee tendencies in Turkey, going from the local elections to the general elections. But in our work, we were not able to find a lot of data. But thanks to this research, we have data now. And we had some observations which are parallel to your findings. Up until 2018, there was no negative atmosphere against the Syrians in Turkey. But if you remember, İYİ Party, Fatih mayor candidate İlay Ersoy put a poster on the street stating that I will clear Fatih district from refugees. And I think that was the time when İYİ Party started to make its discourse against refugees harsher. And in 2021, Zafer Party was established. And they were established closer to the general elections, actually. And I didn't see any reduction of anti-migration movement in Turkey. On the contrary, I saw a rise, actually. Maybe we did not hear such a xenophobic debate in the political party discussions in the parliament, but even in AKP, for instance, there were people saying bad things about the Syrians. For instance, if I'm not mistaken, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in his balcony speech, he said a similar sentence to one of the party members who said, well, they are guests and they should know their place. And my observation is that İYİ Party initiated this hate speech in the local elections, but of course this hate speech grew and became a part of the discourse in the general elections as well. So how do you see Zafer Party's position and how do they contribute to the further increase in this debate? Well, thank you. Is this a connected question? If not, then let's take this question first and then we will take your question. Well, Ümit Özdağ left İYİ Party and founded the Zafer Party. But thinking of what we went through after 2018 local elections, we went through the pandemic, the economic burden created by the pandemic, another economic crisis, and ever since, especially we saw this in the results actually, we've seen an increase in the welfare chauvinism. I think the reason is, on one hand, İYİ Party is pursuing politics against the immigrants. They somehow had it within their system actually. And the team which founded the Zafer Party is a spin-off İYİ Party actually. Maybe after Zafer Party left, İYİ Party changed their discourse, but not so much actually. And Binali Yıldırım saw that the local elections were a lost cause actually. They lost in Ankara, they lost in Istanbul, and maybe he uttered those words because he was very angry because they lost the local elections in major cities. But Erdoğan, Kılıçdaroğlu, Akşener, in fact they all use this anti-refugee discourse one way or another. When you look at the latest election manifesto of AK Party, you see that they're talking about an honorable going back. Erdogan says this, but they soften the words actually. Or look at Kılıçdaroğlu. Kılıçdaroğlu says a couple of sentences, harsh sentences, but the third sentence is a softer one, saying that, well, they're our guests, they're our brothers and sisters, but they have to go back. But of course, when these words are uttered by AK Party, then of course they become more visible. I'm not a part of the research group, but I follow this topic. very well. I don't think we can explain the anti-refugee tendencies in Turkey with one factor or with one reason. Yes, the Zafer Party was established and they are positioned against an anti-refugee discourse. But looking at a larger framework, we see that we are in a very bad economic crisis since 2018. And after the refugee deal with the European Union, both the public opinion and the politicians strongly believe that the refugees are here to stay and they will not go back. Of course, in parallelism with that, political polarization became very strong in Turkey, and in the latest elections, 2023, that's why I think we had a stronger anti-refugee discourse in Turkey. But again, we cannot explain this with one factor only. But yes, Zafer Party was established, and it was established as an anti-refugee party. And of course, they had a contribution towards other parties' political discourse as well. I started talking about the Syrians, but we have different groups of immigrants in Turkey. But because of their size and because of the possibility that they will stay here forever, we focus more on the Syrian refugees. And I think this is why the Syrian refugees are the group which have become more politicized in Turkey. Well, we have another question. Thank you. My name is Inan Ruman. I'm from the International Relations Department of Elçi University. I have 5 short questions about this research. 1, in the political party debates that you've analyzed, do you see social groups or social classes as a discussion topic? And if this is not raised as a discussion topic, is there any reference to groups? For instance, families of foreign soldiers and families of people who fled the war in Syria. Do they make a distinction between these two groups? I have a question about the recommendations that you listed at the end of your speech. You talk about integration, but in short, is integration necessary and is it possible? Well, when we look at the society in Turkey, we already see a very fragmented society. We have Turks with a Turkish background, we have different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, and we have the secular group, we have the non-secular group, we have at least 3-4 social groups in Turkey anyway. So, is integration possible? And if it's possible, where will they be integrated to? Because this is already a fragmented society, so where will the Syrians find themselves a place? And on the other hand, I think what's more important is how the public resources are used and how public order is established. I think these are 2 important concepts. And do you see any reference to Syrian people under these 2 discussion topics actually? Well, you are providing us a framework for new research actually. Well, 4th question, you have some recommendations to European Union countries as well. Well, European Union countries try to solve the problem by giving money to Turkey rather than accepting refugees to their borders. And I think they've reached their target by doing so, and why would we expect to have more from them actually? My final question, in your introduction, you said that the first century of Turkey was shaped with migration, and the 2nd century, I think we are stepping into that with the problem of migration actually. Not only migration, but the problem of migration. So, in the 2nd century of Turkey, and with the migration problem. Is it possible to create or establish a nation? And what will be the place of Syrians, or the crowd we call Syrians? Well, thank you. I was not able to say hello as you entered the room. I just want to say hello as well. Well, we received so many questions from our professor. Maybe we will not be able to handle them all. Some of them are really difficult questions. We need politicians sitting on the side of the table as well to take those questions, maybe. Well, I don't know if it's in my hand to answer those questions, because some of them are really political questions. Your first question was about class and whether class is a topic of the debate. Well, yes. There is a lot of discourse around Syrians being cheap labor force. I cannot remember the exact figures, but yes, there is somehow a reference from the opposition parties to Syrians being cheap labor. And we also had interviews with the political party representatives, especially the Labour Party, İşçi Party in Turkey looks at this issue from a class perspective. And as you said, this is a fragmented society. We have Turks, we have Syrians, we have Kurds, and I think there are two classes as well. Regardless of the ethnic background, there is the exploited segment of the society, and there are the abusers of labor, actually. And you also talked about a distinction between people who fled the war and people who should be fighting, but they're not fighting and they fled the war. I cannot answer this question because we did not analyze this in our research. And your next question was, how is it possible to integrate the Syrians now that we have such a fragmented society? In fact, the perspective of Turks towards Syrians also define how fragmented we are. How can I say this? There are some people who are concerned about secularism, and they consider Syrians as the voting storage or voting base of the AK Party. And there are other people who believe that they are our Muslim brothers and sisters, and it's inhumane to send them back. So yes, there is such a distinction as well. And your question about the European Union, maybe we should ask this question to European Union countries, but in another meeting, Professor Deniz said, when you look at the top 3 nations applying for asylum or refugee status in Europe, Turks came the 3rd, actually. So I think Deniz just said European Union should think about this as a problem as well. And the answer to your 5th question is really, really difficult. Well, I hope we can make it possible. Can I take the floor? Yes, again, I'm not a part of this research. I'm here as a moderator, but I want to introduce my contribution as well. Integration and building a nation in the 2nd century of our country. I think these are very important questions. And what's sad is, I think we saw this in this research as well, we do not analyze this topic or discuss this topic with real facts. That's why I think it's quite meaningful to see the change in MHP. As long as they are in the opposition, they were criticizing the government's or ruling party's approach to Syrians in a very harsh manner. But when they allied with the ruling party, they have been keeping silent or quiet about refugees. So, we see that political parties do not have the intention, neither the capacity to have a thorough discussion or debate about the refugees. And we saw this in the latest elections as well. Now that political parties are incapable of conducting such debate, maybe we can have a look at the other parts of the society. For instance, trade unions. I think this is a very important topic for the unions as well, because refugees are seen as cheap labor. But again, we don't see a very thorough debate among the trade unions on this topic as well. I think this topic is quite open to manipulation. This topic is very open to disinformation as well. And the organized segments of the society, like chambers or trade unions in the healthcare sector or in the education sector, unfortunately, they do not play an important role in this discussion. And I think this is quite a disappointing fact, at least for me. In the first century of the Republic, especially in the first decades, Turkey received a lot of migration from the Balkans, for instance, but that was the Turkification policy of the state, assimilation policy. I think we can use this word as well. The state tried to create a society around being Turkish, but the immigrants came here on a voluntary basis because they were not able to stay in their homeland anymore, and they were quite willing to become Turkish as well in the first decades of the Republic. So that assimilation, I think, became successful, although it grated some of the cultural elements as well. So I think from now on, we will have another round of assimilation of the Syrians as well, but I don't know how easy it will be. So how are we going to build that national identity? And what will be the other group in Turkey? So maybe I'm turning to David now, because this is what he said in his introduction. You raised your hand. I think you wanted to say something, David. Is that so?
Ask a question, if I may.
Yeah, please.
But first I would like just to make a very short comment on the last topic debated. I mean, if you speak about nation and fragmentation, it depends, or the question about integration and what is a nation depends totally on the perspective. If you consider a nation or member of a nation only who is an ethnic Turk, speaks Turk as the mother tongue, and is a Sunni Muslim, you have a very narrow concept of nation, and still you would have political and cultural fragmentation. But if you don't use the word fragmentation, but diversification, for instance, and you open up and you consider a nation being something more diverse, more colorful, more vivid, you might have a different concept and a different concept of integration. And just last comment, nation comes, of course, from the word to be born. And I understand, I mean, sending 4 million Syrians back is simply not possible. And partly because a part of these Syrians have been born in Turkey and are going to school currently and will go to university in some years. So they might be an important factor of integration of Syrian refugees in Turkey. My question is, what happened to the immigration or anti-immigration discourse after the elections? Did it alter? Did it change? You presented to us a very important, the meaning it had in the electoral campaigns, but what happened now, and what do you think is going to happen in the forthcoming electoral campaigns for the local elections in March 24? Is immigration or anti-immigration again going to be a decisive topic? And my other question, but that you already said, difficult to answer. I mean, your recommendation list reads something like a Christmas wish for us non-Muslims. Do you see political conditions for at least some of them to be seriously discussed or even solved here in Turkey?
Ben çok kısaca YouTube'dakiler için özet geçeyim David Bey'in söyledikleri.
Well, let me summarize the question for the YouTube viewers because they cannot hear the translation. David, in reference to our previous debate, made a comment about being a nation and integration. So maybe rather than seeing this as a nationalism movement, we should see it as a diversification. I mean, rather than seeing this as a polarization, we should see it as a diversification. Maybe for the second century, we have to look from this perspective to have a better debate. So rather than integration versus polarization, we should focus on diversification. And he went on asking the question, and his question is, after the elections, how did the debate around refugees change? And we're coming towards the local elections, so is this going to be a topic again for the electoral campaign? And then he finally said that the recommendations that we listed at the end of the presentation are like a Christmas wish list. Do we have the necessary or availing political conditions in Turkey to fulfill those recommendations? Well, debate after the elections. We have the anti-refugee bloc. I think, in a nutshell, they're only focused on their own problems now. Within the alliance, they have some problems. Therefore, they don't care about anything about Syrians or security or education anymore. So these are no longer topics of debate for them, because whether the candidate was right, who's going to be the leader of the alliance, these are the main questions that are important for them. And I think these questions will be valid for the local elections. First, CHP will go through their leader elections, and they will define their candidate, and I'm sure they don't have room for any discussion about the refugees, but I think right before the local elections they will start heating that topic again. About your second question, yes, I'm an optimist, and I hope for the best actually, because I don't know any other alternative than being an optimist. What can change, and to what extent we can have this possible? This could be a topic for people who are sitting in their echo chambers. For the voters of AK Party, for instance, refugees is not a very important topic for them. Yes, of course, we need a survey to find more about this, but this is just an observation of mine based on the results of this research. This is not the scientific data, by the way, but of course, the voters would want the situation changed, and only if they want it, things can change. There's the demand side and the supply side. On the supply side, we have the European Union and AK Party. So do you think the European Union want the situation to change, or AK Party want the situation to change? Again, this depends on the context, and this depends on the conditions of the time. But we will have an AK Party ruling for the next 5 years, and if things go this way, I think nothing will change in the next 5 years. I don't think they will change their policies. So, last questions?
Do you want to make a comment? I have a question, in fact, because there is no question in the room, but I have a question about Zafer Party, the Victory Party, parallel, a follow-up to the previous question. So this is extreme far-right anti-migration party. These parties, or such type of parties, they gain strength during the election period, and they become more popular in the election period. So what about Zafer Party's non-election performance or after-election performance? And well, you've given examples from Europe as well. So what about its maneuvering area? Will it expand its electorate, because AfD in Germany, they have gained ground in many states. They are number 1, number 2 sometimes, and they have been quite marginal, a very small-sized party before, and deemed as such, but now they have a prominent role in German politics in a very short period of time. They gained ground. So, taking into account all of this, what do you think about the future of Zafer Party? Non-election performance. Not bad, in fact. They're performing not bad when it comes to versus the vote rate they got. I mean, in the opposition media, we've seen them at Sözcü TV, Halk TV, KRT or KRT. They have they have been interviewed a lot by these the Nation Alliance Kılıçdaroğlu. I mean, there's a memorandum of understanding, and we learned about it. So will they expand? Yes. I mean, there are examples, there are cases that they have done so before, especially academic studies in Spain and Portugal show that. I mean, these are the most recent cases. They thought they were immune. It was immune, but no. In Spain, Vox, for example, they have gained ground as well. They are on the rise. I think in the parliament, I think they're number 3 or number 4, if I'm not mistaken. In Chega, in Portugal, again, they are anti-refugee, anti-migrant, and since they had 2 or 3% of the votes at first. Now they gain more ground. They have more voters. So Zafer Party was established in August 21. So thinking about the organization phase of the party, August 20. Well, it's a 2-year party. I mean, thinking of that. They have high visibility in the social media, especially, and the opposition electorate, they're favoring it. So, and they may become stronger in the future. Yes, please. Can you introduce yourselves first? The mic is open. Okay, Güldihan Dinç, International Female Refugee Solidarity Association. Well, I have a sociological or psychological kind of question. That's the threshold which I think we overcame it, but we have lots of migration from Syria, and hence the problem. But the problem started before. We are in a Muslim society, and the reference is Islamist movement and lifestyle. So, and that's why we have an anti-Arab kind of sentiment. It's a kind of traumatic. If you want to go to Hajj, you go to Mecca, Medina, Saudi Arabia. We pray 5 times, and the muezzin sings or holds prayer in Arabic. So maybe our grandfathers, ancestors are Arabic, but we are against them now. This animosity and enmity against Arabs should be investigated sociologically, on top of the current thesis that exist. I mean, it's not without looking at it from the nationalist point of view. The Turkish Islamic synthesis. We live that, but we are anti-Arab at the same time. Thank you very much, Güran. Çetin has a new study on that. He raised his hand. He wants to comment on the question, and Professor Ezgi will comment on this question, I'm sure, as well. Can you introduce yourself? Yes. Is it on? Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Çetin Çelik from Koç University, Sociology Department. We have interpretation. Please slow. Koç University, Sociology, member of faculty. So I wanted to answer this question. I think it is also a follow-up to what David said. I could catch the last part of of this activity. I thought it would start at 5, excuse me. But this anti-Arabism or anti-Arab thing is nationalist. In fact, it started with the Mecca insurgency in 1916, and in the last time of the Ottoman period, there was this Arabic Ottomanism, Turkish elites who went to Europe and France. They had this Orientalism that were reflected to the Arabs, like, well, this was this Arab civilization. This civilization movement should start with the Arabs, the periphery. This is the dominant view of those Turks that went to Europe. But when with Britain, I mean, the independence movement created a shock with the Ottomans because part of the Ummah, they were not aligned with the Ummah. They were after becoming independent. And then the Arab geography being dominated by Western imperialist powers, and still there, it still exists. So in the Turkish media, this is talked about a lot, and if Arabs would have aligned with us, their efforts with us, things would have changed. This is the stance. But then we have this Hatay incident in 1939, where Arabs were under the tendency of fascism, or they were inspired by fascism, and it has racist lines as well. İlkin has Okyay has a book on that. I suggest you read it. So this anti-Arabism is the other of the Turkish identity. Like the Kurds, they were the others of the Turks. The same happens in death for the Arabs. They are passive in literature. They are non-progressive. They are reactionary. They don't have a kind of a manner. And the Turks, they're described in a positive light versus the Arabs. So David, I think, mentioned something on this nation building or identity building in Turkey. How would we integrate refugees here because Turkey has already a fragmented structure? Well, this is a legitimate question. It's difficult to answer. And it's not like I'm accepting diversity. You cannot answer it with diversification or diversity or an acceptance, because ethnic lines, borders, they have a historic cultural background. I mean, diversity in Europe, yes, it exists, but this is not the environment in Turkey. We have a historical backdrop to this issue, and the categories that have been created today, they have a certain background, and anti-Arabism is an important element of it. I don't have the answer to this question. We will wait and see how it goes, but this top-to-bottom democracy, I wished it could happen, but it's difficult to accomplish. Maybe for many there will be this in-depth segregation, conflict between groups, and I think difficult times are awaiting Turkey. I am a bit pessimistic in that regard, but thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Çetin, for your remarks. Now I would like to turn to Professor Ezgi. Maybe he would like to comment this question. And there are no more questions. Is there one more? Yes. Microphone, please. Dear Professor, my name is Ojda Şükran Karaş. I'm from Bilgi University. I'm a doctorate student there. I just finished my doctorate thesis on migration. So, in Turkey, I mean, I don't remember the exact date, I'm so excited, but this concept of social cohesion came at some point in time. They don't say it's integration, they say it's social cohesion. Well, now and then this diversity comment came, we're all discussing that, but they're trying to smoothen the policy and incorporating the Syrian element. Is it not, I mean, let me rephrase my question. To just soften the environment, because that's what they're trying to do now. And I don't know how it will evolve, but this social cohesion concept of the Migration Directorate, I think it's forward-looking somehow. They have a certain intent or intention. Microphone, please. Local elections were mentioned. Well, I work with Syrian NGOs in Istanbul. At the end of September, they were, for people who are not registered in Istanbul, there was a deadline. After the deadline, when you catch someone who is not registered in Turkey, they would be put into repatriation centers or readmission centers, and we wanted to go against it. We talked to the governor's office in Istanbul, and we had some public statements about it, but it did not work. The governor and the migration administration, they told us that until local elections, don't expect us to do anything. Don't expect anything. So, I mean, AK Party Istanbul policy is until elections is to catch people who are not registered in Istanbul and send them back. This is well, I mean, when you go out at night at Kurtuluş, I've seen it happening, actually. Secondly, I should talk about the municipality in Istanbul, İmamoğlu, and for the last 5 years have been doing something. I mean, they have established a migration committee in the municipality, for example. And on Wednesday, all Syrian NGOs have been invited to a meeting. They will be briefed on what Istanbul and municipality is doing about them. So there are positive developments, there are negative developments happening at the same time, but we will see what will happen until the local elections. All political parties, they will go along with the preference of their own electorates, and this will reflect also on their behavior. Thank you very much for these comments. So the context of this meeting showed its importance. We're talking about 5 to 6 months until the next local elections. Well, this study started 3 months ago, I mean since May, so we have seen more security checks until local elections. And so the migration, anti-migrant and anti-refugee issue has been politicized, which is also seen or evident in the street. I have a question, or something I'm curious about, is there are employers who are employing migrants. What will happen to their operations or workplaces? Because every day, I mean, we have seen that hundreds of people, they have been caught at these workplaces and sent to return centers, and some employers, they're trying to save their refugees or their refugee labor. So in the society, there's a segment, I mean, that requires the labor of migrants, and they want them to stay. They want to stay. So I'm curious about the next 6 months. I think you should investigate what the employers will do and what kind of measures they will take and what their stance will be when it comes to migrant labor, and how it will reflect on the public bodies measures. Well, about what Professor Çetin said. Well, I don't want to add something to it, but I would like to talk about a general issue. So when we look at the questionnaire and surveys that we have conducted, we have seen that interpersonal trust is going down. Empathizing is on the decline, in fact. And people, they lack trust. They're insecure, they lack trust, they don't trust in one another. And this is not only true for citizens. It's about they don't feel secure when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers and migrants. So then we talked about social cohesion used in lieu of integration. Well, it's a difficult question to ask. we had a government representative here today to answer this question. I mean, there are strict controls now. People are returned or sent to readmission centers or return centers. Well, it's a question mark. And what Professor Didem said, we've seen it in our interviews. SMEs and the tradesmen and craftsmen of Turkey, they're exploiting Syrian labor. Yes, they make money from it by exploiting migrant labor. Yes, that's a fact, but it has not been mentioned a lot so far. Maybe, I mean, yes, there are kind of raids catching people and send them back, and the employer's attitude or stance may be an important study topic. If you're interested in studying it, you can go to the field and study it. Well, Professor Ezgi, thank you very much. In conclusion, I would like to say something. We have arrived at the end of the first century. This is the first day of the second century of Turkey. As I said in the beginning, as citizens of the Turkish Republic, it's an immense source of pride for us. But there are areas which we could not build in an equitable way. Equal citizenship principle is an important principle. If we can render it operational, then we can figure out how people who have just joined us will get involved in our society, and the debate around it will become more just. I mean, the existence of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers leads us to this question of equal citizenships, and it's debating this issue will be an important process. So it opens the door to debate this issue, and we are afraid of the future, and that's why we're very sensitive and react against this migration. But Professor Ezgi, as he said, and as we mentioned in one of our articles, the migrant question is burning, and it should be taken into account. It should be seen, because it has an effect on different segments of society. I'm not talking about right or wrong. It's a political, cultural, economic phenomenon, and we should not disregard it. It has various dimensions, and if we debate it in a just way, we will strengthen the citizenship concept in Turkey. Thank you very much for participating and contributing to this meeting. Please feel free to chat once the activity is over. Thank you.